Welcome to Novel Ideas. In this edition, we'll be talking to Malachi O'Doherty, writer, broadcaster, and popular pundit. And we'll be talking to him today about his new book, Can Ireland Be One? Malachi, you're very welcome to the programme.
Thank you very much, Mike. Glad to be here.
Thanks for being here. This book asks a lot of questions. It probably asks more questions than it answers. But today we want to get some answers from you. And I suppose the first one is, do you ask more questions than you give answers?
Well, yes, I suppose so, yeah. I mean, my background is journalism, and journalism is about asking questions. I suppose the approach that I take to a book like that would be very different from the academic approach of people who've done other books on the same question this year. It's a journalistic approach. It's go out and talk to people. Go out and talk to people like Saoirse Eastwood and Doug Beattie and Trevor England and others, and find out what their experience says to the question and what their thinking does. But also there's an element of memoir, a very strong element of memoir, and that through a lot of the books, because my starting point is a curiosity arising from my own experience of life, you know? And it kind of surprises me when I meet people who don't have that curiosity. I do meet people who are fixed within ideological positions, who are resentful of me in some ways, who accuse me of being a super, you know, someone who took the soup, or a turncoat, or an Uncle Tom, you know. And these are names I get thrown at me on Twitter, and it's as if they don't quite credit the right to individual curiosity over and above the political ideology that they stand over firmly themselves. And they suspect it. They say, well, he's up to something, you know, or he's just weird. He's got a kink in his thinking, or he's got a chip on his shoulder, you know, and he's not to be taken seriously. That's the kind of response I get sometimes to the work that I do.
Is it a very common response, though? Because I noted at the launch at the Crescent Arts Centre that you congratulated the audience, on being there, which was fabulous, because you'd filled that theatre, but also that they were a nice audience, perhaps too nice. Were you really looking for challenge on that occasion?
No, not really. I mean, but I genuinely do find it almost a little bit harder to deal with an audience which is entirely affirmative. And that's what I get at book launches. That's like, I joked it was a bit like my wedding day, you know? I mean, one of the hardest speeches I ever made. I suppose, yes, there is something in me that wants to rub up against something, you know, and responds better when challenged than simply affirmed. I was nervous that night, Mike, and I was nervous because all these people had come out to get the book, to meet me, to see a performance on stage. And the way we'd organised it was a book launch, so nobody was paying money to get in, and everyone hopefully was going to get a free glass of wine. But the setup was like a theatre space with an audience in the seats, and I'm on stage. Alex Kane went before me to say some very nice things about the book. And then I'm thinking to myself, the whole point of this exercise is to sell books. So if I stand here talking for half an hour, that's time lost to signing books and selling them. That's what we're here for. And I thought, are these people going to feel cheated when they've been brought into a theatre and seated, you know, in front of a stage, and it's, you know, lights, action, you know? That's what I was worried about. Nobody actually said that to me afterwards. But my job at a book launch, and I would give this advice to you or to any other writer at their first book launch, says give them 5 minutes, you know, because you give them more, then you're going to sell fewer books.
I actually think that both you and Alex Kane gave a great performance, and it was an entertaining performance, and we felt good about going out into the auditorium, or out of the auditorium, to pick up a book.
So that excellent. Was
well done.
Thank you for that.
Malachi, why this book? Why this book?
Because it's a question that's in the air. you know. And it's a different question to what people are asking, really. People are asking, when will we have a united Ireland? Or how do we prevent a united Ireland? You know, these are the political ideologies in play through nationalism, republicanism, and unionism. And I've come at it a wee bit laterally and say, well, can we have a united Ireland? We do have a deeply divided society in Northern Ireland. It's not fitting well together. Bringing the two parts together into a devolved government is not working very well. Why do we suppose that bringing the two parts of the island together would work any better? The Republican answer to that is, well, the cause of division is partition. And I say, well, no, you're wrong there. The division precedes partition. It was there right throughout the 19th century. In some ways, you can trace it back to the plantation of Ulster 400 years ago. So there's no reason to suppose that just ending partition and creating united Ireland will end the division that we have between people. It might indeed exacerbate it, you know. There's clearly a section of society in Northern Ireland which adamantly does not want a united Ireland, which adamantly insists that it is British. Now, there's a part of the Republican ideology is, well, these people are deluded. And that's in the proclamation of the Irish Republic as declared by Patrick Pearse on the steps of the GPO in 1916, that you know, that these people have been distracted, I think, or whatever language he uses, but they've been deluded, they've been misled into thinking that they're not really Irish, and we will welcome them back into the fold of, you know, of one Ireland. You know, it's baloney. You know, it's simply not. You know, it's, you cannot go to somebody like Jeffrey Donaldson or Doug Beattie, you know, or Arlene Foster, and say, "Wise up, you're Irish." You know, it doesn't work with them. On the other hand, there are other questions about about what Ireland would have to answer in order to be more accommodating of unionism, if it was conceivable that it ever could be. Like, who are we? What is our journey? And in many ways, the Irish account of its own experience begins with 1916, begins with the Easter Rising, the declaration of a republic, and there is a sense within that this destiny must be ultimately fulfilled. You know, well, unionists are not going to buy into that, but is there something else they might buy into? Is there a way of looking at the Irish story and the Irish experience that is more accommodating of their understanding of who they are? And perhaps I suggest that's in the 19th century. I went back looking at war records from the Battle of Waterloo, the American Civil War. You know, the Irish fought the Battle of Waterloo. You know, the Irish fought at the Battle of Waterloo. Something like a quarter of the soldiers on the battlefield that day were Irish. You know? They were led by a man that people refused to acknowledge was Irish, the Duke of Wellington, but his family had lived in Ireland for 400 years and he was born in Dublin. So he was Irish whether you like it or not, or whether he likes it or not, right? So there's a way in which a unionist could tell the story of the Irish journey without surrendering anything, simply by recognizing, you know, a Protestant, Anglo-Irish, British-aligned history going back hundreds of years too. Daniel O'Connell, you know, the liberator, the great champion of Catholic emancipation, you know, the founder of the Catholic Association, stood in front of an audience of people gathered in Mullamast in County Kildare, and he said, "At famed Waterloo, old Wellington would look blue if Paddy was not there too," said the Shan Van Vogt, right? In other words, telling the people of Kildare to take pride in the part they played in the Battle of Waterloo, you know? Now that flummoxes every kind of Republican vision, you know? Pearse's idea that 6 times in 300 years we have risen up as a people to throw off the English yoke, you know? Well, no, when Daniel O'Connell is asking them to take credit for winning English wars.
And of course, Napoleon knew how valuable the Irish were too, because he tried to recruit Irish brigades to fight for him. Yeah,
and in many ways that's the sequel to the story of the United Irishmen, because many fled to the continent and joined with Napoleon. And part of the problem, part of the reason they were going to Napoleon was because they couldn't join the British Army because there were penal laws in place which restricted Catholic recruitment into the British Army. And the East India Company caught onto this and said, look, there's all these guys in Ireland, they're eating potatoes, and they're actually taller and healthier than the wee fellas we've got in the looms of Manchester and Liverpool. Could we not have them in India? And they recruited the Irish, and they broke the penal law tradition by recruiting Irish people first into the East India Company, So, I mean, the Irish story is much, much bigger than the people in the island, and it includes the American Civil War, where Irish fought on both sides for slavery and against slavery. And when they fought for slavery, Daniel O'Connell excoriated them. He says, it wasn't your Catholic Irish mothers that taught you that kind of cruelty, And the Irish, I trace my family a little bit through the O'Hallorans and the Dohertys, my mother's and father's people. And I just went into war records, not looking for relatives because I'm not that closely studying it. But tell me where the O'Hallorans were. Tell me where the Dohertys were at war. Theophilus O'Halloran fought at the Battle of Waterloo, and now every day, nearly in my email, the British War Records people are sending me records of Doherty that was in the Palestinian police, Doherty that fought at the Crimea. That's part of the Irish experience. So if we have narrowed the Irish experience to understand a simple story of our liberation from Britain, denying our own role in the colonizing of India and other areas, and in limiting that story, we have shut the British identifying Protestants out of it. There is a way to enlarge that story and include them in it.
And there should be a way too of enabling us to feel comfortable about the labels that we use, the almost identity crisis that keeps recurring through the book.
Yeah.
Who are we? What are our names?
Yeah.
And where are we going?
Yeah. Well, the news reports will describe the housing estate that I grew up on as a nationalist area of Belfast. Right. Now, what does that mean? If you're taking it at face value, what it means is that most of the people, or all of the people who live in that housing estate, are nationalists, right? And what do we mean by nationalist? We mean that they want a united Ireland, Well, why do they want a united Ireland? Well, some of them want a united Ireland because it fits with the vision declared by Pearse in 1916 and completes the story. Some of them want a united Ireland because they're internationalists and they want to get back into the European Union. And some of them couldn't care a fig whether there's united Ireland or not, So we are using vocabulary for want of clear understanding of what we're talking about. We talk about the Catholic community, Well, yes, you and I kind of have an idea that there is such a thing as the Catholic community, but they're not Catholics. Well, okay, they were baptized Catholics, they went to Catholic schools, but some of them want abortion law reform, some of them oppose abortion law reform. The Catholic Church says you can't be a Catholic if you help somebody to have an abortion. In Catholic canon law, there is only one sin which provides for automatic excommunication without the necessary word of a bishop, and that's facilitating an abortion. And what are you doing if you vote for a political party which provides for abortion? No one takes that seriously at all. But what I am saying essentially is that we are using words, labels for people, for communities, for areas which don't apply at all. The only way in which we can really use those terms with some confidence that we've got them right is when we're describing churches or political parties.
Is there a way in which we should be self-identifying instead? In other words, rather than have labels put on us, ascribed to us, we say, this is who I am.
I absolutely insist on that, Mike. I absolutely insist, When somebody calls me a Catholic or a nationalist, I say, I would rather you said I'm a Taig, because then I know what you mean, then I know what you mean. You mean that you decide what I am, not me, right? And what you're saying is, and you're using words like Catholic and nationalist, which are actually wrong, because they don't fit my political ideology or my religious beliefs. But I am Irish. I was born on the island of Ireland. I had a Catholic I was baptized a Catholic, and I had a Catholic education. And my name is a Gaelic name. I am a Gael in a sense. I'm descendant from an O'Doherty chieftain in Donegal in Inishowen. You know, so you know, make of that what you will, or read what value you like into that. I don't particularly read any value into it.
So you were saying to me earlier, he might have been a wee skitter.
Well, in a play by Brian Friel, which one was it? What was the name of it? I should have my research done. But anyway, about the flight, about Hugh O'Neill and the flight of the Earls. You know, he refers in very disparaging terms to O'Doherty of Donegal. You know, likening him onto human excrement if we're going to keep our language clean.
Well, well done for that. We can't be popular with everyone, can we? You've introduced us to a lot of lovely people in the book, but people, a lot of people who have changed their identity, or at least their core beliefs since birth. Lovely people. Could you talk about some of those?
Well, I mean, one who really impressed me was Saoirse Eastwood. Saoirse is, well, she's Catholic. She's baptised Catholic, went to Catholic school, went to St Dominic's in the Falls Road, is now, a member of the Alliance Party and MLA for the Alliance Party. But she's a perfect example of the complexity of upbringing, because she was brought up a Catholic in Lisburn. You know, went to a school where there were Catholic children of prison officers and soldiers, you know. So she, you know, and when I was talking to her, you know, she said, you know, she doesn't have that reflexive feeling that if a British soldier in uniform approaches you, that he's trouble, which I would have. I do have that reflexive feeling. I try to deal with it, and I'm civil to them. I had a very odd experience once where I was doing a talk to soldiers in an officer's mess. And the soldier who came in to pay me my fee at the end was the only one in uniform. And I immediately kind of, oh God, it's a Brit, you know, because I've been knocked around by Brits, you know, as others have. And so I deal with that. Saoirse, you know, said, you know, I grew up in an environment in which there was a simple understanding that the soldier in uniform was there to be of some help, you know, was not a problem. That's it. She went to St Dominic's on the Falls Road, where she was regarded as a Protestant by other girls in the class, and was abused for that, and had a difficult life at school. But because she was living in Lisburn, she had to go into town in her school uniform and get the bus out to Lisburn with kids from Inst, BRA and other schools who abused her for being a Catholic, you know. So, I mean, that's, you know, anything that you say about Northern Ireland which simplifies the two communities model and says this is what we're stuck with, is completely thrown askew by the experience of somebody like Saoirse Eastwood. And I mean, one of the others, even Doug Beattie. I mean, Doug Beattie, who was an officer served with the British Army in Afghanistan, in Bosnia and in Iraq, you know, would give you the impression on first acquaintance that you know, he's standard fare for the Unionist Party. But the man's not a Protestant in any meaningful sense, you know. I mean, his father told him he was a Protestant when he asked him at the age of 12, what am I, you know. But he's, you know, he had a religious experience, and he describes it in the book, where he was at Garmsir in Afghanistan under fire in horrific conditions, and basically taking cover in an open grave. And he says there, I said, get me out of this, God. And something happened inside him, which affirmed a religious or a spiritual conviction.
I think it's about us learning to find ways of describing people that's not offensive.
Yeah, yeah.
There's some lovely laughs in the book.
Thank you.
You've got your friend John, when you're a teenager, at the celebration of the anniversary of the Easter Rising.
Yeah.
And John's out in the front waving a tricolour, waving an Irish flag, and chanting Celtic.
Celtic, Celtic.
But the irony of the situation,
yeah.
which is, you know, that To be on a GAA pitch
Yeah.
chanting for a Scottish soccer team
Yeah.
just defies logic.
Yeah, in declaration of your Irish republicanism, I mean, I do remember that very clearly. I mean, and I mean, there were Republicans in his family, and we saw the troubles. This was 1966, so it was Easter 1966. It was the 50th anniversary of the Easter Rising. There was a big parade up from Hamel Street up the Falls Road. The trains were taken off from Dublin to Belfast because there was this fear that revolutionaries would come up and, start the war all over again. But anyway, I was among people who were gathered in the pavilion at Casement Park football ground. That had been the primary school I'd gone to, by the way, that pavilion. So I can recover the memory of the smell just like that, it's terrific. But I was in the stand, and there was John out in the field, all chuffed with himself, and he had this big tricolour. And of course the mischief of waving the tricolour, because it was illegal. If he'd been out in the street with that, he could have been arrested. That was the law at the time, the Flags and Emblems Act. And this was how he was declaring his rebellion, Celtic!
The other thing that made me laugh, there were many times of light humour, and I think in a book like that you need to leaven it with light humour. But there's a lovely story about Frankie Callahan.
Yeah.
And being intimidated out of the shipyard by loyalists.
Yeah, and then joining the British Army.
In the British Army.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually we're in Northern Visions, where Marilyn Hindman was one of the founder members of this organisation and produced a wonderful book called Further Afield, Journeys from a Protestant Past, which was an inspiration to me in some of my own thinking about things, because she produced a book of many autobiographies or memoirs by Protestant people in Northern Ireland, and every one of them contradicted the standard cliche stereotype of the Ulster Prod. And the reality is, you stop anybody out in the street and they will contradict it. They will show up. So Frankie Callahan, he called himself Frankie. We called him Francie, but probably after Francie and Josie, but which you don't remember either. But Frankie was a classmate of mine at school, and he was a mischievous wee brat, but a lovely guy. And I only met him with him again in recent times through Facebook. And then I went to London and on business or something, and met up with him there, and we had a great yarn. And he gave me an interview, actually, first of all, for that other book, 50 Years On. And his story is that when he left school, and I lost contact with him when he left school, but he got a job in Harland Wolff at the shipyard. And he was one of very, very few Catholics there. And one day they were in, I suppose, maybe, I don't know whether it was a works canteen or a relaxation room or something, but he was there. And basically a knife just whizzed past him and stuck in a board behind him, And people said to him, we don't want your kind here. We don't want your kind here. And what do they mean by his kind? What did they know of Frankie Callahan? Of what kind of person he was, what he believed about anything. He was a co-worker, but he was a Taig, or he was a Fenian, or he was whatever, in their eyes. And he had to leave, and he joined the British Army. And he went to Germany. He was in a signals regiment, and he was in Germany. And his job in Germany was monitoring signals from the Soviet Union, And Frankie and I met in London, and we went for a bit of lunch, and we had a chat. And I says to Frankie, do you have trouble when you come back home to Belfast? Do people give you a hard time? And people do slag him a bit, but he's very close to his family, and his family are close to him. But he told me, I says to him, Frankie, you were there, you were on the Iron Curtain, monitoring the signals from the Soviet Union, and we were being told that we were always, on the brink of nuclear war, and we'd get our 4-minute warning, and as soon as the tanks came rolling across the line, that would be it, Was it real? When you were there, did you believe we were on the brink of war with the Soviet Union? And he said, oh yes, Malachi, absolutely, that's what we lived with day by day.
Both John and Frankie appeared to change their identities over time, and perhaps ended up doing things that were not what you might have expected.
In John's terms, John was a working class Catholic lad from West Belfast who supported Celtic and totally identified his support for Celtic with the nationalist cause, if you like, right? The reality is he was going to a Christian Brothers school where, you know, he wouldn't have been allowed to play soccer in the yard. You know, the Christian Brothers would go to the window if they saw boys kicking a ball out in the yard to be sure they were picking it up the odd time, you know. That's how fanatical that GAA culture was within the Christian Brothers schools. But he would have, you know, he would have seen the support for Celtic as integral to his nationalist or Republican sentiment and his sense of belonging to a Catholic community. Frankie and I both left the Christian Brothers at the same time, which I suppose about 1967. So it's before the trouble started. There were a few other lads at that time who went into, I know one who went into the Air Force, you know. There were others who joined the Army. The employment opportunities that were available at that time, a lot of them went into the post office, because if you became a telegram boy, you got a wee motorbike, you know. And they loved it, you know. This was success for a 16, 17-year-old boy in Belfast, get a job in them. And some of them went into the civil service and into the Belfast Corporation, and others went on to third level education. But it wouldn't have been so hard for Frankie to join the army in 68 or 69 as it might have been in 71, 72. I don't think, you know. Even within the Catholic community, you know, the way in which the Christian Brothers and the school system generally was preparing you for working life was to prepare you for work within the state system through jobs in the corporation and the civil service and the post office. Maybe not the police. I don't remember anyone getting a recommendation from a brother that he should go and join the RUC. But, you know, very likely some did, and then didn't tell their mates too much about it.
But of course, your experience with the brothers as a Belfast city boy and they as rural Irish teachers was a culture clash.
It was. I mean, I was in a sense a country boy. I mean, I was from. My father was a dairyman. My grandfather was a Corkman. I was born in Donegal, but grew up in Belfast. But these were men who had accents which were strange to me. You know, probably Cork, Limerick, Galway. You know, accents I wouldn't presume to try and replicate. So yes, it was just as strange in one way as it would have been in another way to go into a school where the teachers all had English accents, because Limerick and Galway and Cork are as far away from us as Liverpool, Manchester and Hull.
One of the strong elements was the teaching of Irish.
Yeah.
How do you really feel about Irish? Because you've got a lovely expression in the book. You talk about we all love Irish, but we're not really prepared to work at it.
Well, you know, I'm a bit like that. But I mean, I got on well learning Irish. At the end of my first year at school, I went to the Gaeltacht in Donegal, and my Irish. And I mean, I was awfully homesick. I was only a wee lad, and I was crying in the classroom. Because the teacher used to bellow at us because we were on holiday, he couldn't slap us. You know, so that was the treatment we got. But I was away with guys, you know, who later became. I mean, Kevin Burke was one of them. Who later became a Christian brother, and then left the brothers and became a headmaster of St Mary's. Frankie was there, Frankie Callahan. Tony Henderson was there. Tony was in our house. Tony left school early and joined the Provisional IRA and was one of the first IRA casualties killed in some kind of training camp accident. But you know, I took to Irish and I enjoyed learning Irish and speaking Irish, and very quickly got my fáinne airgid, the little silver fáinne, which is a little silver ring that you wore in your lapel beside your pioneer pin. and because we were all, you know, at confirmation we'd all sworn off alcoholic drink, God Almighty. But that meant when you wore the fáinne airgid, you know, that other Irish speakers might stop you in the street for a wee conversation. So I get on well with Irish, and I don't speak it very well now. I wouldn't be campaigning for an Irish Language Act in the way that some people do. But there's diverse reasons for that. One is that I don't like the language being associated overly with a single political movement, right? I think the Irish government's experience of trying to turn Irish into the national language is a failure, quite clearly a failure. I do think people like me do have maybe a sentimental regard for the Irish language and like to retain a few words of it, almost because it has a symbolic value as a declaration of Irishness, you know. But I think an Irish Language Act which will enable, you know, government documents to be translated into Irish. I mean, who reads government documents? And what kind of English is there in them anyway that you want to turn into some kind of abortion of Irish as well, you know? So I would have preferred to see some kind of, and we are seeing this to a large extent, but some kind of cultural revival of Irish, as, you know, with conversational spaces and arts events and so on. And some of the Irish language community are very annoyed with me because they say that I have demeaned the language or I have criticised it. On one occasion I was on a radio programme and I said that English is a superior language to Irish, you know, the bombardment of tweets. I mean, of course it's a superior language to Irish, and depending on how you assess superiority. It's spoken by more people, it gets you more access around the world. You know, the Oxford English Dictionary is what, like that. The standard dictionary of Irish is like that, you know. But you know, I'm not hostile to the Irish language.
I mean, you can imagine for yourself if you rocked up to somewhere in India and spoke only Irish 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Your chances of getting a hearing at all would be minimal, whereas if you rocked up speaking English,
that's it. Yeah.
It was the official language at the time.
But the other thing is, English is my mother tongue, you know. I mean, my father's mother was a native Irish speaker from Fanad and Donegal, right? So her mother tongue was Irish, right? But mine is English. I learned English at my mother's knee, you know, reading wee books to me when I was 3-4 years old. That's where I learned English. I learned English in primary school. I am suffused with the English language, and I love the English language, and I write in the English language, and I insist on writing well in the English language. I'm not just, you know, it's not just a facility for communication. I want to use the English language in a beautiful and meaningful way. And I hate it when I hear the English language being distorted and you know, obviously it evolves and usages change. But I kind of defended against some of that revision of meaning, you know. When I hear people talk about the amount of people who voted for something, you know, there's no such thing as an amount of people. There's a number of people. Amount is about, you know, quantity. You know, or amount is, well, what is it? I'm going to lose my way again. But, you know, you know, when you're enumerating a collective quantity of things, it's a number. It's not an amount. But it is now. There's nothing I can do about that.
Amount is about things. Numbers about people.
Well, yeah. You can drink a certain amount of Guinness before you start confusing with yourself and your friends around you, or you can drink a number of pints of Guinness, you know.
Just to finish off with the Irish language, though, the wonderful thing for me about Irish is that we all speak it every day. We just don't recognise it. So in place names and in sentence constructions, I mean, where in English would you get the following sentence? And there I was in the middle of my dinner and the door knocked. You know, that's an Irish sentence construction. And it's beautiful. I love it.
Yeah. And the place names, you know.
And the place names.
Shankle.
Absolutely, you know? Quite so. There were some lovely characters in the book, and I mean, I'm thinking of people like, for instance, Davy Adams, who I think I came across briefly at one stage too, and whose path has changed totally over time. How did you run across him?
When did I first meet Davy? I think I probably got to know Davy when he was doing contributions to the Talkback programme on Radio Ulster, because I was doing these wee talk slots on the programme, so I'd bump into him and have a chat with him. I always liked him, always got on well with him. He had been a member of the UDA, there's no getting away from that, you know. The UDA killed neighbours of mine, you know. So there's no, you know, but, you know, and maybe in all integrity I should challenge him on that someday, but I don't, you know. He was part of the talks process towards the Good Friday Agreement. He got a column in the Irish Times. He's a beautiful writer as well as a beautiful speaker. And then he was recruited by the charity Goal, and he travelled in developing countries, you know, with the charity. And he wrote an article once about his work, I think, in I don't know where, Syria or somewhere. And he was outside Goal in Dunleer one day having a smoke with another guy called Davy. And Davy says to him, "Davy, the mother's very concerned about you, you know. You're going to all these places and they're very dangerous, you know." And she says she was reading an article about you in the paper the other day, and she says, "Will you tell me the next time Davy goes away and I'll go down and light a candle for him," you know. So every so often Davy would go out for a smoke with the other Davy on Dunleary outside the Goal offices, and Davy would say to Davy, "Are you going away? The mother wants to know," you know, because she wants to light a candle. Now, I love that story, you know.
I know where in his fondest dreams in his childhood would he have felt that he would have been blessed by someone lighting a candle for him in a Catholic church.
Do you know that he's part Indian?
I didn't know that.
He's only discovered that himself.
Wow.
And he's been telling me about it. He's written a beautiful book about a great-grandfather, John Adams, who served in the British Army in India, you know, and who married an Indian woman, and whose children were brought back to England. And he's only recently found, and written a beautiful book about it, his Indian connection. So identity, you know, don't go claiming that you've got a specific British or Irish identity without checking a lot of bloodlines first, you know.
And also, we're not clones. I mean, you know, we're definitely not clones. I loved Alex Kane's introduction to your book at the Crescent Arts Centre launch, but I was slightly taken aback by his conviction that the whole process seems to be inevitable.
I'm not sure that it is inevitable. I think a border poll in a united Ireland is inevitable. I think there are a number of factors which can precipitate instability and a border poll. One factor is quite conceivably just a British politician, a British Prime Minister or Secretary of State getting fed up with Northern Ireland, you know, through the whole Brexit complications and just throwing it into the mix. We'd be better off without you. And there's been some muttering among the European Research Group, the pro-Brexit people in London, that they would be better off without us, right? So that's a possibility that could come about. The other possibility is just that the growth in interest in United Ireland would grow alongside demographic change. We're getting this growth of the Catholic community, decline of the Protestant community. Certainly there's no indication that the whole Catholic community wants a united Ireland or wants a border poll. There's no prospect of it succeeding at the moment. But we just know that the future isn't predictable. We've been through a pandemic, we've been through a crisis, and we're now the cost of living crisis, an energy crisis, and we're now effectively at war with Russia. You know, none of which were factors, just 3 or 4 years ago. So we don't know what could happen. I think to myself personally, in what circumstance would I vote for a united Ireland, right? And I might vote for a united Ireland if the British economy tanked, and I lost hope of being sustained well within the UK. Why would I vote against a united Ireland? One of the strong reasons would be for the preservation of to stay within the National Health Service, but that's being horribly depleted, and could go or could get so low that we'd all have to have private health care anyway, So why might I not vote for a united Ireland? I might not vote for a united Ireland simply because I don't want the political instability, But that's voting in a sense for the sake of my Protestant neighbour or my unionist neighbour rather than for my own sake. And I might not vote for a united Ireland if I thought the people in the Irish Republic might not vote for it, because there's no point. It'd be a calamitous trauma if we had a vote in the north that was carried and defeated in the south. And yet that could happen. And one of the things I'm saying in the book is, you people in the south, think about this a bit more carefully, Because where I started in this discussion with you, Mike, was to say that, the ending of partition does not end the division. All it does is pass the responsibility for managing that sectarian division here from London to Dublin. Now, do you want it? Do you want a new Ireland in which we have a kind of unionist British Donetsk, or Gaza, an enclave of very angry, very hurt people who cannot identify with the state and who will be troublesome in any way that they can and have a proven record of being as troublesome as they want to be.
We're going to come back to your vote in a second, but I want to deal with something else first, which is, in the book, as I was reading it, I said to myself, is Malachi debating with politicians, with opinion formers, with the readership, or with himself? Which was it?
Well, I think it's with myself primarily, you know. I mean, the last lines were only thought up in the writing of them, you know. I didn't, you know, if you're writing a novel like Terry Branken Has a Gun, you know, you try to have some sense of what your conclusion is and you're working towards it, you know, and you craft the whole thing to move towards that. But in a memoir-led, analytical, reflective book like Can Ireland Be One, you are asking yourself questions and you're going out to meet people who might help you with that question and discussing their experience with them. So that's why it's a mix of memoir, journalism, self-reflection and analysis, and a little bit of personal angst, if you like.
And talking about personal angst, there's the subject of your vote, because you give as much care, you say, to how you vote on a border poll as you would give to the contract to buy a new car.
Yeah, because it's important. I'm an old age pensioner, right? I have a small private pension, which is going to fluctuate with the price of energy in the world, probably. And I have a state pension, and I have a small income from writing books, right? Now, who's going to look after my state pension in a United Ireland? I need to know that, you know. No, if you had asked me when I was 15, I would have said, United Ireland, no matter what the cost, right? Because people have died for it, you know, and I am happy to make sacrifices for that. Well, that doesn't apply in my thinking anymore, you know. I'm not about completing Patrick Pearse's vision of a united Gaelic Catholic Ireland or any kind of united Ireland if it doesn't serve my interests and the interests of the people nearest me. So pension, healthcare, the European Union, and yet the European Union brings me back to the identity question, because if you actually try and pick apart with me why I want to be in the European Union, I'm more likely to fall back on the identity considerations than on the practical ones, because I don't know whether the European Union will survive. I don't know if Vladimir Putin's going to nuke it in the next year or whatever, you know. But so something of identity works in me, but that identity consideration is focusing more on a kind of sense of being European rather than either being a little England or a little Britain or a little Irelander.
Malachi, it's been an absolute delight talking to you today about Can Ireland Be One? And thank you very much for appearing with us here on NvTv. Thank you.